Welcome to the Motherhood Alliance podcast, the podcast dedicated to empowering moms and families on their health and wellness journey. I'm Brittany Suttner.
And I'm Andrea Rinkus. Together, we're here to explore holistic approaches that go beyond conventional medicine.
Each week, we dive into topics that matter most to you. Everything from nutrition and mental health to alternative therapies and natural living.
And whether you're a new mom navigating the early stages of parenthood or a seasoned pro looking for new ways to support your family's well-being, you're in the right place.
Even better, all of our guests are local small business owners who you can actually talk to and work with. You can learn more about today's guest and connect with hundreds of other health and wellness professionals through our informative and easy-to-use directory at motherhoodalliance.com.
Before we get started, keep in mind that this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for personal healthcare advice. Please consult your healthcare provider before making any changes based on the podcast content.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Are you ready to help your family thrive? Let's get started. Hi, we are Britt and Andrea from motherhoodalliance.com, and we are excited to welcome you to a 4-episode series with Stephanie Bohn, a highly skilled speech-language pathologist and the founder of Rooted at Home, a Fox Cities-based therapy practice that brings speech, language, and feeding support right to where families feel most comfortable, and this would mean into their home, meeting them at parks, joining them at childcare centers, or even virtually. Stephanie holds a master's in speech-language pathology, a bachelor's in communication sciences and disorders, and is a certified lactation counselor, so she knows her stuff. But what makes Stephanie truly special is her passion to help all families have deep conversations and stress-free meal times. This passion stemmed from a deep personal experience with her grandma, which she shares about in episode 1. In our 4 episodes together, we chat about early communication tips, picky eating, how therapy doesn't have to happen in a clinic to make a big impact, and how to utilize play to help kids develop healthy communication and eating skills. On a personal level, Stephanie was born and raised here in the Fox Valley, and she finds joy in reading, biking, baking all things sourdough, and spending time with her husband. Let's welcome Stephanie to the show. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We're excited you're back here with us. And we also have Stephanie back here in the studio with us. Welcome back, Steph.
Thank you.
We are going to continue our conversation from episode 1. In that episode, if you did not listen in, I highly recommend going back and listening to it because she really gave an awesome overview of what a pediatric speech therapist does. And we also did start talking about the communication side with littles. But we're going to be diving more so in the communication side in this episode, and she's going to be giving us some really awesome tips for helping kids develop communication early. So I think to kind of kickstart this episode off, Steph, let's just start high level with where does early language development start?
Most simple answer I can give is at home. We talked a little bit in the last episode about the difference between receptive and expressive language. So for anyone who didn't catch that piece of the first part of our conversation, receptive language is really that understanding with your child and the things that they're hearing, what's the meaning associated with it? How are we teaching them that? And then that expressive piece of, okay, how are they using their body, whether it's their words, their signs, their gestures to communicate like what they want and need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so us modeling that from when they are teeny tiny, that's how they start to develop it, right?
Absolutely.
By watching us, essentially.
Yes. Yeah, just being a part.
How much does it matter with, I'm thinking about babies right now. A lot of times you're baby wearing or you have them in a swing, and even though they're around you and you're talking, they're hearing that, they don't actually see your lips moving. How important is that aspect?
It's important, but I think sometimes if we focus on that, that's not really like what we want to be, right? So, sometimes even like we were talking about book reading in the last episode, like if we can have your child like actually turn to see you or they're next to you on the couch, right? A lot of times we plop them in our lap, their back is like to our chest. Okay, but they're not actually like seeing us and they're seeing our facial expressions. Like just thinking about like, where are we when we're talking with them? And even if you're baby wearing, right? Like they can still look up at you. If they're out, they're seeing the world, but just those different ways, like more opportunities and exposure to different places is always going to help them be like well-rounded with that language exposure.
So when we're talking about communication, I think a lot of parents, they want to know if their child is quote unquote on track, right? So let's start by talking about some of the typical milestones that you're looking at as an SLP and then kind of the common age for each one. And then kind of looping even more into it, at what point should parents know if they should seek help or not? Like, what is the range where you're kind of like, kids are different. They need different time spaces to bloom in this area. So at what point are you kind of past that typical age and it's like, all right, now it's time to maybe seek some help. So walk us through the milestones.
So before talking about that, I just want to touch on the fact that when it is, midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and you're feeding your baby and you're doom scrolling, you are going to find mixed information about those milestones. And I am just here to validate, as a speech therapist, it is super frustrating because you might go to the doctor and you fill out your little questionnaire and they say, is your kid saying this many words? Oh, you failed the screen, right? And then you might go to a website and they say something completely different. There is no universal milestones. Every organization has their own. Super confusing. So just something to...
So frustrating.
Yeah.
But also, it's frustrating that they aren't agreeing from a research standpoint.
Yeah.
But maybe it's actually okay too, because it makes parents, as long as they know that,
Yeah.
it makes them go, okay, there's a huge grace period here.
Right. It's such a gray area, like all across the board, I feel like, with those milestones, because people used to say, hey, your kid should be walking by a year old. And now like we're given leeway up to like 18 months old.
Oh,
right.
wow.
But if you're talking to grandma, she's like, oh, they should be walking by a year, So there's a lot of different milestones. But when we think about like typical milestones, we can break it up into, honestly, like each month, but that's just like a lot of work. So when I think about from like the beginning of just like birth through 6 months old, like that cooing, that smiling, just those foundational skills is really something that we're looking for. Responding to those sounds, recognizing your face, and just like blowing raspberries and squealing and like that laughing, like those are just some of those early like foundational skills that we look for even from the very beginning to like make sure a kiddo's on track.
And it's not like once they hit 6 months, if they're not doing something.
Yeah, we got to hit like the panic button.
Yeah, hit the panic button. I
Right.
feel like a lot of parents, I don't know, it seems like they're panicking because,
Absolutely.
Their kid is not at that exact level.
Right.
But like you're saying, every entity out there that's, APA and speech language pathologists, and like that's all different. So
Right.
keep that in mind.
Right.
Yeah.
And for those panic moments, like give me a call.
Yeah.
We can talk about it.
That's a great idea.
We can do one visit, give you some reassurance. And if they are on track and if they're not, then we can jump into something right away to get started.
At what point should kids be forming their first words, roughly?
Roughly, I say around like that year of having a word with meaning. So, right, when we talk about like babbling and kids are babbling like mama, 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 and it's like great. And we talked about in the last episode, like associating that with mom. But, when we're thinking about like those first words, like, are they using it to call for you? Are they using it when you walk in the room, right? Like, we want to make sure there's some intentional meaning behind it when we consider it like to be that first word. But, I think before we jumped on, we were talking too about like your son.
Yeah.
And, a first word can still count as like a sign or a gesture as long as there's like shared meaning behind it and they're using it like appropriately and consistently.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that. Different ways of communication, even before the first word. We're talking sign language. Baby sign language is huge.
Yeah. Kids can a lot of times use their hands or body to communicate a lot of times like before those first words come. And some people will say like, oh my gosh, I don't want them to learn sign language because it's going to prevent them from like using their words. We can give them exposure to all these different ways and give them a platter of what's going to work best for them.
Yeah.
So, if we're only signing it and we're not using our words, okay, then we're only focusing on that. But you can sign it and say like
Absolutely.
more, you want more at the same time and give your child that choice of what works best. And a lot of times once the words come, those signs fall, like they just go away because the kids are learning. It's a lot easier to just use their voice because you don't have to look at their hands, right?
Yes.
And a lot of times kids will make a sound. They're like, well, they're signing more. Okay, that's a start.
Mm-hmm. This also makes me think about when a kid has siblings. And so oftentimes when a little one has siblings, the siblings do all the talking for them.
Yeah.
And so this is where a lot of families are probably like, oh, they're delayed because my first one spoke earlier and now this one doesn't really have to, but I'm also concerned because they're not hitting the milestones. And do you have any other thoughts on that for the families that have multiple kids?
A big part of thinking about older siblings' personality, right? Like you have some big personalities in your family. That's totally fine. How can we use that as a strength? And I talk so much with families about that. Like if we have 100%, right, of just like a chart and your oldest children are taking up 85% of that, it leaves a really small percentage for your youngest child or the one who's maybe not using as much communication. But how can we use that to, as a benefit to work towards that child like learning? Like how can we use the older sibling to help? Like, hey, like let's help teach.
Involve them.
Yes. Like let's go to the store and let's teach them about, the fruit and let's go pick these things out together. Like put them in that position where their strength can be used to help. But it's, a lot of times there's personality too, like your third baby or your second baby or whatever number you're on, that might be your most chill baby. That's okay. We still got to think about like those foundational skills. After that year-old milestone, we're typically looking at kids starting to use about 10 to 15 words. They're following some of those simple directions, starting to point, use some of the waving, for hi and bye. Then as we get closer to that 24 months, 2 years old age range, we're really looking at them having about 50 words so that they can start to use those single words to combine them into phrases. It's really hard to combine phrases and come up with like, Mama, help, if you don't have those as single words and like know what that meaning is. We'd also start to think about as they go over that 2 to 3 year old standpoint that they're building those phrases then into 3-word phrases and they're, following 2-step directions of like 2 things at one time. As we get into that 3 to 4 year old range, that's when we would start to expect to hear some of those sentences really forming and more of that conversational speech going back and forth. And around that 4-year-old time frame, we're expecting kids to be 100% understood by any unfamiliar listener.
Mm-hmm. Let's jump into some applicable tips for encouraging early talkers. So for the families that are, they have the time, they have the space, they want to put some mental effort into this, what are some things that they can do to help encourage talking?
I think the biggest thing that you're going to hear me continue to talk about is just including your child like in those everyday routines with you. And us using the words and having that association as close to that word. So when I say that, if we're going to talk about milk, like let's make sure the milk is out on the counter or we're pouring it into the cup. So when we're saying milk, they're understanding, oh, what's getting poured out, like that's milk, it's not water, right? I mean, we are all using language as a shared understanding. And when you're pouring that out and you're talking about it and like, oh, can you feel this? The milk is cold. Like, let's go put the milk back in the fridge. Hey, mom's going to have a glass of milk. Oh, go ask, like there's all of that is narrating, right? And that is a huge strategy. And then repetition is already built in because it's like, okay, if I'm pouring a glass of milk and I say it 5 times, great. Now they just heard the word milk 5 times and it's right there. Mm-hmm. If we waited and we said, hey, like I'm going to go grab you some milk. And then we get distracted and all the other things moms have to do. And then we go get milk 5 minutes later. That association in the brain isn't going to be as strong and those neural connections aren't going to be building as much.
Makes sense. I mean, what about like even just doing daily things like washing your hands, like singing silly songs is something that we would do often too.
Yeah. So songs are something that I feel like we use so much with infants, right?
Yeah.
Like they're frustrated, they're upset for whatever reason, we can't figure it out. We're just going to start singing a song. We're going to use some movement with it, right? That's all language, right? Like when we're singing and when you are washing your hands and make up a song. Like it doesn't have to make sense, but if you sing that song every single time with your kids, like maybe that's going to be something that they remember and they want to pass on to their kids, like we used to do this with mom. So incorporating like that aspect of play and fun is going to be so beneficial for your child to learn.
I feel like tunes and music really does help kids learn things faster and makes it stick, because they not only have the words that were associated, but they have the tune that went with it too, and that's catchy and stays in your head.
That's helpful for adults for crying out loud.
I'm thinking about when I was in like 7th grade Spanish class, there was songs. My kids have learned, they know the books of the Bible in order because of a song.
Yeah.
So, I think that's really awesome.
And we call that in the world of therapy, like, to build off of that, like parent ease of like you're using of like your mom voice, or like think about like seeing a little baby or a puppy and we're like, oh my gosh, so cute, right? Like your voice goes into a whole different octave.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's what gets their attention. But like, let's use that, right? Of, hey, let's go wash your hands. If we were like, go wash your hands.
Right.
Which one do you want to respond to?
Right. Yeah.
Do you have any tips for helping kids develop the specific sounds that tend to be tricky, especially as they're growing up? I think about when my kids were little, one of them was having a hard time with L's, and then we heard the Elmo La La song. Do you remember this, Drea? I know Caden sang it too, but it was like la 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 Elmo song.
Oh boy.
And just like over and over and over, and the L's obviously are being worked on in there. But how do you help with kind of the sounds that tend to be trickier for kids to develop?
So between 2 and 3 years of age, of course, differing research, there's about 7 sounds that kids are supposed to have mastered. So I think, when we think about working on those sounds, like first, let's get in touch with somebody who knows like what's age appropriate,
Yes. Yeah.
To just kind of like give you some of that guidance first. And then when you're working like with your therapist or, someone who's helping you work on those sounds, finding those strategies that are going to be most relevant for your family and that like make the most sense. And I know that's not like super specific, Britt, but it's helpful. Like you said, that song, right? To work on that, like that's relevant though in your family. So just thinking about like, let's make sure first that it's age appropriate, because really kids have until they're 4 years old to be 100% understood by somebody that's like not familiar with them. So we think about like a 2-year-old, that milestone of who's understanding them and what percentage is that, it's only about half the time. But you got kids on both sides, right? You have kids that are on the lower end that aren't understood as much. And then you have the kids who you look at and you're like, oh my gosh, they're only like 2 or 3 years old and they're having a full conversation. So, typical development has such a range, and that's why we have standard scores and like, okay, there's some on this side and that side so it's hard when you're comparing.
How effective is it to try and directly teach them sounds or words, being like, say la, la, la? Like, how effective is that?
Every child is different with that, but I will say the majority of families that I support, I don't see too many kids who are going to do it like right there on the spot, right?
I mean, put them on the spot, right? That's kind of, it's hard.
And then you get frustrated because they're not saying it. And then like everybody starts escalating and then it's just frustrating, right?
But I feel like this is something parents are commonly doing. They're saying, say mama, say bottle. So so that you don't feel like that's necessarily an effective way of teaching them communication.
Right. When we are often like prompting them and they're not responding and we're getting frustrated, there's so many other ways that we can tackle that over the course of your everyday, right? So for your mama example, like I think about like when you go get them out of their crib or their room or they're getting out of the car seat, right? You're like, mama's going to come get you. Or you open their door and you're like, it's mama. That's also teaching. It just doesn't feel like checking the box, because I oftentimes think that if we say mama and they say it, we're like, check. Yep, they did it, right?
Did it.
But are you as fulfilled if you walk in and get them out of their crib and you say, it's mama, and they say mama? Are you going to feel like that box is getting checked? So just something to think about of kids are not learning super great when they are under pressure. When are those times that they are learning well? And what's unique about your child?
Yeah. And nobody can really do well under pressure anyway, right?
Right. Adults.
Yeah, adults. Somebody was telling you to do something, keep doing it, you're going to clam up, probably.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I know that you often say that movement and learning go hand in hand. So can you give us a few examples of how parents can blend movement with learning to help their kids learn more efficiently?
I think sometimes we think about like learning has to be sitting down on our butt or it has to be somewhere where their body's not in movement. And really, kids learn best through play right now, right? Those ages that they're at. And when their body is in movement, like how can we lean into that? So, if they're jumping on the trampoline, like, great, jump, jump, jump. You're going up. Can you show me down? Like, let's go down, right? Those are all those different examples of how can we incorporate that? You're using the narrating, right? Because you're telling them what their body's doing.
Yeah.
You're giving them meaning. If you're jumping with them, A, that's fun.
Yeah.
But B, like you're sharing that moment with them and you're working on it without, saying, hey, the boy's jumping in the book. Like, look at him jump. Like, show me with your body. So thinking about just those different ways that we can incorporate that movement and lean into it, because it's not a bad thing that kids want to be on the move.
Yeah, for sure.
How should we talk or explain things to kids, especially in this younger preschool age? Because for my daughter specifically, I know when she was little in 3K, 4K timeframe, if she had a Christmas program coming up, she got really anxious and nervous about that. And so that was something that I would sit down and talk to her with. But at that age, she can understand a lot, but not maybe to a level that an adult can understand. So when it comes to communicating with our kids, is simpler the better? Should we almost be talking to them like adults in some situations? What are your recommendations on that?
It can be tricky to find a time. It can be tricky to figure out like what is too much and what is not enough. Sure. I think a lot of times it's hard for us as adults to switch from like adult conversation when we're talking to our little one. But sometimes they just need that like super simple matter of the fact, like this is what's happening. And when you talk about like, okay, that concert's coming up. How much time are we going to use beforehand to prep? Like that's where my mind goes of maybe the day before is not enough time. Like maybe we need to look at the calendar and mark off the days. And so you can have multiple days where you're talking about it. So you're not giving her like too much information at one time. But really when we're explaining things, simple and repetition is going to be so much more helpful, because we can go on like super long run on.
Oh, I know.
Tangents.
I've done that before where when my kids were little, and even now, but they're different. They're 11 and 9. So I don't know. But when they were little and I had to explain something, like if it was running across the street, instead of saying, stop, can't do that, or stop, don't run across the street. Sometimes I would do that, but sometimes it would be like, oh no, honey, we shouldn't do that. And then her eyes would just glaze over, and like, sometimes it's effective and sometimes it's not. Sometimes you just have to be very straightforward.
Absolutely. One of the other things that we can think about is just pausing and waiting and having that response. When we use like that expected look as a parent too, that can be another strategy of like, hey, and then that's like our natural pause. So just ways to incorporate, like give them some time to think, give them some time to even like respond. Sometimes we're just bombarding them with information.
Yeah.
Their brain can only process so much.
Yeah, that's a great point.
To round out this episode, something I know that you've said, and I love this, is that being present, not perfect, is always a great place to start. So what would be your gentle reminder for the parent who worries that their child isn't hitting specific communication milestones when the internet says that they should be? What would be one last word of encouragement for them?
I think always go back to your child best, and they are always going to learn the most from you. We as speech therapists are here to be a resource for you and a support, but therapy doesn't have to be all the time. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you are there and you are in that moment with your child, like find the joy in it and make the most out of it, but don't make it feel like therapy, because it's going to give you the ick. It's going to give your child the ick. They're going to know it's not like a genuine interaction, but really just be there with them in that. And that's my goal, is like help families be in it with their children and be present. And I don't get it right every time. I tell families not, like, hey, let's not prompt them with say X, Y, and Z. And then 2 minutes later, I'm doing it. Right. I mean, that's what I went to school for, and I'm still doing it because it's a natural way that we a lot of times interact with kids. So don't put that pressure on yourself to have to like get it right every single time. Just be there like in it with them.
Well, and circling back to what you do with Rooted at Home, I love that you go to people's homes. So if you didn't listen to episode 1, Steph went into some detail about the different types of speech therapy that there are, the different kinds of locations you can go for it. But she does this private practice. And so she comes to your home so your child can be in their comfortable environment. And that way, when she's doing a evaluation, she can actually see them. They're talking, they're comfortable, right? And they're excited to see her there. But do people need a physician's referral for speech therapy?
So a physician's referral is not required. Your concerns as a parent is enough. And because Rooted at Home is private pay, any family that's looking for speech or feeding support can get that in their home. Just by reaching out on the website, I have a contact us section where you can put in your information and some of your concerns. And then I'll get in touch with you and connect with you and just kind of learn more and see if we're a good fit for each other and kind of share more information that way.
Okay. And for those of you who, again, didn't listen to episode 1, we did talk briefly about the benefits of having private practice because when you can do private pay, you have so much more flexibility in making sure the child gets what they actually need. And I know we did have an episode back, this was way back, so you could find Tabitha. She was the one who came on and guested for that. Yep. Yeah. And she talked about how important it is, the beauty behind private pay and all the benefits that are behind that. So if you're interested in just learning and getting some fresh perspective, because I think so many of us are stuck on the whole
gotta have insurance.
Yeah, it's not accepted by my insurance. I can't do it. And I get it to some point, but at the same time, when this comes to setting your child up for a lifelong of success, it's probably worth it to hear the perspective.
Terms too. Doing it on your terms. Yeah.
Great. Well, this was awesome. We are going to be kind of pivoting our topics going forward for our last 2 episodes. So next up, we're going to be talking about picky eating and feeding therapy. And then in episode 4, we're going to be talking about cooking with kids and making it actually fun instead of stress producing. Like so many of us that have kids, we're just, it's going to be such a mess. But hey, we're going to have some ideas for you on how to make it super, super fun and actually realistic for your life. So those are the next ones coming up. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider leaving a rating or review or sharing it directly with a friend who could benefit from the information? We know that you're a busy mom or caregiver, and our goal is to make your life easier by bringing tips and tricks directly from experts into your earbuds. By sharing this episode with someone you love, you can play a critical role in helping to make their life easier as well. We appreciate your time, and thank you for being a part of the Motherhood Alliance family.